Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I want to acknowledge Paul Lewis, who traveled with us, who took the photographs and videos that we saw, and Russ Benblatt, who put it all together over the last week. Last month, 11 of us from Greater Hartford, at times 12, we were joined by one more for a couple of days, spent 10 days in Israel on an extraordinary trip, motivated by many reasons that we'll hear from tonight. But I want to lift up just one that I think all of us felt throughout the journey, motivating us to go and throughout the journey. And that was the importance of showing up. Again, there were a range of emotions, highs and lows, trauma omnipresent throughout the journey. And at times it felt like visiting a house of Shiva collectively. And, that speaks to the importance of showing up. And so I just want to read, a month ago in the New York Times, Rabbi Sharon Bruce, who's the senior rabbi of IKAR, a Jewish community-based organization in Los Angeles, penned an op-ed in the New York Times, literally entitled, "Train Yourself to Always Show Up." And I'll just read two paragraphs from her essay. She wrote, "Buried deep within the Mishnah, as we know, a Jewish legal compendium from around the 3rd century, is an ancient practice reflecting a deep understanding of the human psyche and spirit. When your heart is broken, when the specter of death visits your family, when you feel lost and alone and inclined to retreat, you show up. You entrust your pain to your community." And then several paragraphs later, she goes on and she says, "We cannot magically fix one another's broken hearts, but we can find each other in our most vulnerable moments and wrap each other up in a circle of care. We can humbly promise each other, I can't take away your pain, but I can promise you, you won't have to hold it alone. And I think that really speaks more than, for at least for me, and more than any other emotion or rationale, the importance of showing up. I've led many, many missions over 20 years, and there was nothing like this mission, including a sense of accomplishment. And so with that, we're joined by 5 of our esteemed travelers who will share some reflections tonight for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. And so I'd like to start building on what I said a few moments ago. Maybe we'll start with Neil Cochin, couched in the dark somewhere in the wilds of Florida. To share, Neil, what motivated you to travel to Israel at this time?
Thanks, David. I didn't want to dwell on the weather, but you brought it up. Yes, it's very nice down here. But notwithstanding it being nice down here, this really, just to echo what you said, this was a trip that we will all remember for the rest of our lives. I've been to Israel. I think it's my 15th time. But this was like no other. Every trip is different, but this one was very, very special. I sort of, initially I felt it important to come. Soon after October 7th, we had the rally in West Hartford Center, and we were there. We heard from our government. We heard from the rest of our community. We heard testimony. The shaliach spoke, and it was moving to me. And I realized that I needed to go there and just help in any way I could. And I even think on the way out of that West Hartford rally, I went up to David and I said, we got to get a mission going. We got to get going. This is something we got to do. I think after the fact, to echo what you said, as one of our colleagues pointed out, this was like a hineni a moment. You're sort of called to bear witness. And that's what we all took it on. It was a very, very poignant way of looking at things that resonated with me. And so I think it was motivated by a lot of things. So.
Thank you, Neil. Gary, do you want to answer that as well?
Yeah, I have an additional consideration as well. One is that having watched on television the pictures from not only October 7th, but everything since up to the time that we went, I thought it important to see it myself, to be able to bring it home, be able to tell people without the slant that one of the media may bring to it, and be able to say, look, I was there. This is what I saw. This is what I heard. This is what I felt. And this is what the needs are. And so that was part of my motivation.
Thank
in
you,
addition
Gary.
to what you and Neil have talked about.
Thank you. Alan, while you were traveling through Israel, I think a lot of people, when they heard about this trip, wanted to go, and yet I know some were sort of nervous. Some declined to go because of the concerns of their family members. Did you feel safe while you were there?
Yes, I felt 100% safe while I was there. Fortunately, we never did hear a siren, but we were told what to do in case there was a siren. And we had a wonderful security guard with us as well. And the streets of Jerusalem were really hustling and bustling, and it didn't seem like there was a war going on at all. So I did feel entirely safe.
Jill, what was most emotional for you as you reflect back on those 10 days?
It's an interesting question because every day was filled with emotion, and just about every experience was emotional. But I think for me, it was the small moments. It was the small moments of humanity. It was the unplanned moments. And I can really think of 2. One was my husband, Rob, and I were going up the elevator in our hotel in Tel Aviv. and we were going to Kfar Aza the next day. We were with our former emissary, and there was another gentleman in the hotel, 26, 27 years old, in the elevator with us. And he started to tell us about his experience. And we ended up getting off the elevator with us, and he talked to us for about half an hour. And he needed to tell his story. And on the morning of October 7th, he lived alone in Kfar Aza, in what used to be the youth village, but they now rent out apartments to young people. They're little efficiency apartments, and it's actually ground zero of what happened. And he heard Arabic outside his window, lived alone. And he said, oh goodness, something horrible is happening. In hindsight, he thinks it's one of the paragliders coming in. And in a split second, he made a decision about what he was going to do. He's a security guard by training. He grabbed his gun. He grabbed the keys to his car, and he got in his car, and he said he peeled out and started going 150 kilometers an hour up the road. And not soon after, he came upon terrorists. He saw cars in the ditch, people dead, and terrorists shooting at him from the middle of the road. And he said, in that moment, I didn't know what to do. I had to make a split-second decision. I decided I was going to peel the car around. He said, I said the Shema as I turned the wheel around in the car and headed the other way and under gunfire. And as he headed back, fortunately, they didn't hit his tires. He was able to go into another kibbutz and spend 8 hours in a safe room with somebody who took him in. But his trauma was so palpable. He was originally from Brazil, made Aliyah as a child, and he said, I'm going home. I can't do this anymore. I can't live this way anymore. I'm moving back to Brazil, and I'm pretending I'm not Jewish anymore. And it was heartbreaking to hear him say that. And his biggest regret, I mean, he's living, and I say PTSD, but I don't think the P exists yet. This is still active trauma. His biggest regret is that he only saved himself that day, that he didn't save another person. And hearing that, it's just heartbreaking to see a young adult that went through so much, feeling so much shame and guilt over not saving other people. And then when we went to the Kfar Aza the next day, and you saw really what happened in that youth village, like, how could he have saved anyone else? He's lucky he saved himself. So I said 2 stories, but that one's long enough. So that sits with me to today.
David, can I just supplement what Jill said?
Sure.
She talked about the fact that he was in a safe room. You have to understand what a safe room is. A safe room were developed to withstand missiles coming in. They don't have water. They don't have toilets. They generally don't have very much food. And the doors are generally unlocked so that people can get in quickly. So, when you think about them being safe, they're only safe. They're not safe from people on the ground with automatic weapons and RPGs. And that's why you hear stories of people having to hold the door closed to try to keep the terrorists out. So,
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Jeff, do you want to also maybe answer that?
Sure. Thank you. And I guess that piece, I did go to Israel with this thought that, we're going to see people that have been traumatized. And while I would kind of echo that we definitely saw a lot of trauma and areas of trauma, I think the thing that stuck with me most was just the resilience of the people. I think, typically in the face of trauma, most people's reaction is just to kind of go to their own space. It's a lot of times could be really isolating. And it was just amazing in multiple areas across the spectrum where you just saw people that just came together, where maybe the government wasn't present the day of or even the day after. You saw this collective community experience of what do I need to do? Where do I need to show up? I think we heard stories of, the brothers and sisters in arms that had been kind of a political movement before the October 7th that were, leading the protests against the judicial reforms. And then the day of October 7th and going, beyond that, going forward, kind of they use their kind of influence and their connections through WhatsApp to really kind of get everybody together to bring resources needed, things that I would have never thought of. But again, you see the kind of the just the sense of doing for others. What medicines that people from the north or the south, what medicines do they need? What medical care do they need? How do we get education back up and running? How do we make sure food is delivered, clothing's delivered? And so you just saw this mobilization. And before, I think we heard a bunch where there was just, there was this divide in the nation. There was this just incredible coming together, and you saw this vibrancy really in all this trauma. There was this resilience and vibrancy and love of life and living that was, I think, forever changing to me.
Thank you, Jeff. I think this is such an evocative question. I just want to linger on it for a moment. If Neil or Alan want to add anything to that. If not, I have other great questions to move on to, but was there anything else that either of you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would say for me, meeting with the survivors from the kibbutzim, we met with the people that had been sort of displaced out of Kfar Sufa, and meeting with them was incredibly powerful. Hearing that firsthand testimony of what it is that they went through, but it sort of was an event that married two different elements, because they clearly had gone through a significant amount of trauma, as Jeff had just mentioned, but their ability to articulate what they went through, what they are continuing to go through. And when we presented with them that we were going to be financially by their side and behind them, their true appreciation and sense of we are all one Jewish people was incredibly powerful to me. I was speaking with a woman for quite some time whose brother-in-law was continued to be held captive. She knew some of the people that were killed. It was very, very emotional and very, very difficult. But the fact that we as a community are going to be with them for at least the next 3 years and probably longer was just so meaningful to them and for me to be able to talk about that. It's a truly wonderful thing that I think our community is doing.
Alan, how did people feel about your being there? How did you feel like you were received by Israelis?
They were enormously grateful. They made it seem like we were the heroes coming on a plane to them versus they were the heroes. For instance, in one of the markets, I was buying something, and all of a sudden the merchant's friend came over, gives him the big bear hug. He just got back from Gaza. We do a l'chaim, and I thank him for serving in Gaza. He looks at me, he says, I only had to drive 2 or 3 miles to Gaza. You had to go across an ocean to come here. You're the hero. And at synagogue with you, David, we met a nice man there, and he said, it's nice you guys are raising the money and everything, but at this point, it's like monopoly money. What we need is your hugs and your caring. And again, those elevator rides in the hotel, let me just mention about the hotel. There's 400,000 displaced Israelis, and they are in hotels or with friends and relatives. And there's these young women with their 3 children just hanging out in the lobbies night after night and after night, and hoping that kids will go to school. And I took an elevator ride up with one of them. I said, I'm here from the United States. Is there anything we could do to help? How are you? And, poor woman, she says, yeah, her relative was murdered, her sister's kidnapped, and her husband's in Gaza. I mean, that's a bad day. That's a really bad thing. Yet she's got hope, and just so grateful that we are there for them. they're so happy to know that we have brothers and sisters. And as Paul Lewis would say, and I would say, I don't have any relatives in Israel other than my 7 million brothers and sisters. And for me, it was my 6th trip there, and it was very, very, very unique. And I made it also to say Hineni, be part of the person in the scroll, as Rabbi Sachs would say, and also to honor my father, who actually went there in 1948 to fight. I remember him saying that it wasn't enough to just dance around the horrors and raise money in New York. He had to go boots on the ground, and I felt I had to go boots on the ground. And now we need to be the emissaries telling all of you in the audience and everybody else what really is happening in Israel. And they are united like never before to, get rid of their hostile neighbors.
Obviously hard to predict which memories stick, but 10 years from now, what do you think will be the one thing that will most stand out for you about this trip? Anybody jump in? And before you do, while you're thinking of that, I just want to remind the audience, there is on the bottom of your screen something labeled Q&A. So please, we welcome questions. Please put them in the chat, in the Q&A rather, not the chat. And then we'll come back to them in about 15 minutes. So go ahead, Jeff. I know you unmuted.
Yeah, no, I guess it's kind of echoing what I said before. I think it's that marriage of, sadness and hope and rebirth, and that out of crisis and out of real tragedy, that sense of just, resilience and strength. I can't stop thinking about that piece of just that idea of, what, we are here, we're going to build, we're going to rebuild. I think we heard it from Kibbutz Sufa, we heard it from the other kibbutz members that we met with, and I think with all that's happening, there isn't, I think in part I thought I was going to go and see just people tearful on the street and just everybody walking with their head down, and I think, like Alan had said, it's there's this sense of we're gonna survive, and I've heard it, and I heard it a number of times, that Israel is gonna come out stronger and better and kind of more together than ever, and that was just, I think that's what
So
sticks.
David, sorry, Jeff. I have 2 thoughts. One is the image of the retired tank commanders who realized that the Israeli army didn't have enough tanks to go into Gaza, and were able to find the 250 graveyard tanks and then cannibalize them to create 100 operational tanks that hadn't been operated in 30 years, but also to call on the reservists, people who were now in their mid to late 40s, who had already completed all of their reserve duty, and get them back to volunteer to become part of the tank command in Gaza. The other thing is, as we stood in Kfar Aza, and we looked out towards Gaza City, and you could see, not only can you hear automatic weapons, but you could see explosions from bombing, and to realize what an absolute waste of resources the Palestinians had done to create their 300 miles of tunnels, and how they had wasted an opportunity to build up an area with fabulous beaches, and with the real opportunities to develop an area for their people. And it's just heartbreaking to see that, and now it's left with the Palestinians and Gazans in terrible straits, and the Israelis forced to try to confront the whole situation that they've had to face with the invasion.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jeff. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? The enduring memory 10 years from now? One enduring memory, single.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, it's the entrepreneurial spirit that, we know that Israel's called the startup nation, and we all know the reasons. And we definitely saw that in action wherever we went, whether it was from the tank brigade that Gary was just talking about, or the resilience that Jeff was talking about, setting up amazing cutting edge trauma centers, or brothers and sisters in arms. But that amazing entrepreneurial spirit, really filled this vacuum where the government wasn't. And we heard that across the political spectrum from everyone. The government wasn't there. And the people didn't wait. And in some cases, we heard a story, I think it was at the Chalmei Yerushalayim,
Kamal.
Kamal Yerushalayim, where they said, after a few weeks, the government came to them and said, where are all these internally displaced people? We don't know where anyone is. And they had list upon list upon list of like exactly where every internally displaced person was, in what hotel, where they were in the country. So that was really a civilian effort, and no one was asked to do it. The way they explained it is like they called on WhatsApp, come to this square at this time, and people came and they said, like, I can handle transportation of soldiers to their bases. Okay, you're in charge of that. I can handle getting used clothing. You're in charge of that. And this organically happened. And they ended up with like a company that I think in the United States would take years to build.
Exactly.
What
Exactly.
David, I think the thing that really differentiated this from many of my other mission trips was really meeting the people up close and personal, particularly the young people. I mean, we went to a yeshiva of girls, and they bore witness, unfortunately, to this terror. It took them at least 6 weeks of getting back to normal till they would venture back to their schools. And they drew all these paintings, which you saw in that slideshow, which they should never have seen those things to be able to paint that, or to put the poetry down as well. And then we saw young boys, 18 years old, ready to go to the IDF. We met these young women at the military camp for the dogs that were going to the Gaza the next day. I mean, my heart really cried out that, these could have been my children doing all these things. And it gives me strength that they are so committed to Kol Yisrael Chai, and they're concerned about us. They asked us about the anti-Semitism that we are experiencing. So it really brought all the Jews together, and it gives me very good hope that this current generation is saying Hineni, going to war, and they want to keep doing it until they get the job done. I heard that many, many times. And the even younger generation who has unfortunately experienced this, and gives me hope that they will also be the best that Israel has to offer in the future.
Thank you, Alan. I want to shift a little bit and maybe turn this back to you, Jill. For those that don't know, Jill is our extraordinary board chair. Signed up for a 5-year term, and silence is acquiescence, Jill. So
I'm just muted. It's the COVID.
So I want to ask you more about. We heard a little bit about Kibbutz Sufa. I think
Sure.
Jeff Landau mentioned it, and this new partnership. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. We had the great fortune of having a woman who works for the Jewish Agency come visit us maybe 2 months ago now. And they were in the early stages of forming a new program that paired communities in the Western Negev envelope, which they've now changed the name from the Gazan envelope, with North American Jewish communities. And they've always done partnership agreements, the Jewish Agency, and we've had Shinshanim in our community and Shlichot in our community. This is different. This is a new program that's pairing. It's called Communities Together. It's pairing, again, communities affected in the Western Negev with North American Jewish communities. And there was a group of us that had dinner with her, and we said, we have to jump on this. And so the commitment that we've made is a 3-year $250,000 a year commitment to this community to help them with whatever ultimately they need, whether it's redeveloping in industry, workforce training, leadership support and training. And so we'll work with the Jewish Agency, a few Israeli companies that have agreed to help them, and our community. It's going to give us an amazing opportunity for people-to-people connection that can involve the entire community over time. And we were given 2 kibbutz that they thought would be a good fit for our community. And without a doubt, we said we want the kibbutz that needs us the most, and that turned out to be Kibbutz Sufa. And so Kibbutz Sufa sits about as close to Gaza as you can be. They sit right in that little corner with Egypt at the Rafah Gate and Gaza. And there are about 250 people. They're displaced now. Half are in Ramat Gan and half are in Eilat, I think.
Ofakim, I think.
Ofakim, okay. And we met with them in Ramat Gan. We feel like there's a really good natural fit with our community. They are so happy to meet with us. They have a harrowing story of how they survived. And I'll leave that to somebody else to share if they want, because we also then had the next day the opportunity to go down and actually see their kibbutz. So we're really excited about this opportunity for our entire greater Hartford area.
Anybody else want to add to the Kibbutz Sufa impressions?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, well, I think what's important is to recognize that the kibbutz of 250 people, they lost 3 people in holding off the Hezbollah fighters while waiting for the IDF to show up for like 6 hours. And you think about that's a significant part of your population. And yet here they are talking and planning for their future and really looking forward to getting back into their homes, into their community and rebuilding. And so I thought that their sense of resilience, their sense of commitment, their sense of hope was really infectious.
Were there initiatives that you observed, maybe I'll turn this to Alan and Jeff, that might have application in our community? For example, leading question, education for children with disabilities, special needs, or other things that you saw?
Yeah, again, I think it's kind of emblematic of the Israeli culture. It's both innovation and imagination. We had gone to Beit Izzy Shapiro, where they had a hydrotherapy pool that was typically to get into hydrotherapy. It's in a hospital. It's open to the community for kids and adults with special needs. They had a Birth to 3 program. And I think, a lot of times here, and I work in the mental health field, I would say a lot of times we're kind of in our own silos and we're kind of focused on just kind of our individual work. And again, this idea of community and doing together. So they had this program for mommies and mothers and infants to kind of be together in a swim class, the infants with developmental disabilities. But it's not only kind of a format and a forum for moms and their child to connect, but moms and moms to connect. And again, I think that sense of community and that sense of how do we think more globally was pretty impressive, because it's kind of a one-stop shop, this use of technology and trying to really look at and find ways to kind of maximize what a child and adults experience with disabilities can be. And then, another just kind of on that same kind of innovation, we went to Shalva Institute, Shalva Center, and the story itself is incredible because people could kind of read it, but it was a rabbi and his wife that had a child that had a pretty severe reaction to immunization, a catastrophic response where he became blind and deaf and unable to speak. And the mom had said, if my child ever learns how to communicate, and is ever able to kind of participate in the wider community, I'm going to dedicate my life to kind of helping others like him. And they were able to kind of get that help. And then she, with her husband, have just created this just amazing. It's really mind-blowing to think about everything that they've done. And the focus is, how do we kind of look at what people's abilities are and how do we really integrate them into kind of the world around? And if anybody gets a chance to Google the Shalva, they were part of Eurovision and they were competing, and there's the lead singer is a blind singer. There's a young boy with Williams syndrome that's playing on the piano, and they're amazing. And it's an incredible story, and it's kind of taking ideas and really bringing them to fruition. And I think it's an incredibly motivating story.
Yeah, I'll finish the Shalva story. We always think of Israel as startup nation, high tech, but what we saw was high touch, and Shalva is just that. We were able to loop around the whole circle because on Friday night we had dinner with Rabbi Tuvia Brander from Young Israel, his mother and father, and his mother is an occupational therapist at Shalva. I was sitting next to her, so she was able to share a lot of those stories with me and at the Shabbat table as well. The other organization that we visited that we helped to fund, which also has implications for how we could do things better in America, is Hatzalah. Hatzalah is the immediate medical response wing of medical care in Israel. They didn't start off as ambulances, but they have 7,000 volunteers and they all wear beepers. And the goal is to get a medic to a site within 90 seconds because the ambulance might take 10 to 30 minutes. Well, this was also the brainchild of Eli Beer. And on the day of October 7th, many of these Shomer Shabbos Jews, Arab volunteers, secular, very religious volunteers, their beepers were going off. And about 1,300 of them rushed as fast as they could to go down to the south. And we know that 1,200 people were massacred. What we don't realize is there were over 5,000 people injured that these immediate medical response people helped. And many of them were injured in the line of gunfire. 2 of them died. So that was an element. I've always sort of Magen David Adom and everything. They do great work. And this is just another example of how to get immediate medical care, which I think we could use in the United States as well. And it really helped that day in Israel.
Thank you, Alan, and Jeffrey. Last question, then we'll open it up for audience questions. And I think some of you have answered this already in some of your prior answers, but out of this 10-day extraordinary experience at this time, and a lot of depression for, I think, Klal Yisrael, including just what's happening around here. Some of us were participatory in a pretty ugly ceasefire resolution effort at the Hartford City Council 2 nights ago. And yet, I think there was a lot of positivity, as some of you have alluded to. What gives you hope out of this experience for Israel's future?
I think for me, it's the excuse me, the same thing that gives me hope here. It's this coming together, and David and I had the great good fortune of hearing from an amazing speaker last week at the Jewish Federations of North America board meeting, who talked about the covenant of Egypt versus the covenant of Sinai. And this covenant of Egypt, where we're bound together in slavery and trauma, versus this covenant of Sinai, where we're moving forward into joy and in the future. And so what's bound us together now in this real way that we haven't been bound together in years and years and years is this covenant of Egypt, is what happened on October 7th, is our eyes being wide open, is what happened at the Hartford City Council meeting 2 nights ago, although we were able to push it back, like David said. And so what gives me hope is being able to take this energy and bridge it into this covenant of Sinai, to really work together to build bridges with Israel, with our Israeli brothers and sisters, to build flourishing Jewish communities right here, to use this energy that has been built up by this horrible catastrophe. And there's no silver lining, make no mistake. And yet there is an opportunity. And I think it's dependent on every single one of us, not just those presenting tonight, but every single one of this on that call, to really take this energy forward and make sure that we're staying connected as a people. And I think we have a real opportunity to do that.
So we have, thank you, Jill. We have 4 great questions, at least, and maybe more will emerge, and we have about 15 minutes. I don't know if anybody else wanted to quickly answer that last question. We can do that.
I was just going to echo what Jill. I don't think I could say it better than what Jill said. And I think again, I think, you know, with COVID and everything else, I think there was a sense of complacency and almost separation, and kind of we lost a real sense of community. And again, in this terrible, terrible tragedy, I think what I do get hope from is that I probably feel more connected to others and to Israel than I have in my lifetime. And I think that sense of brother, you know, that sense of bonding and connectedness, and really for the first time kind of knowing what it means, Am Yisrael, is I think a source of hope.
David, I would just add that, you know, they had an ability to build their communities and make their community stronger through volunteerism. You know, they didn't rely on the government. In some ways, the government failed them. But notwithstanding that, they came together and they filled the void by doing that. And I think as a model, it's a great model for our community. The ability, I mean, we certainly could use lots of new volunteers besides dollars, which of course are always necessary. But the sense of give us some time, help us build our own community up, help us fight off the anti-Semitism and these ceasefire, one-sided ceasefire resolutions that are showing up everywhere. So their model of behavior is something that I thought was a great takeaway.
Alan Solinsky, David Silver is asking, do Israelis really want us to come? I've met a few who say, no, not now. What is your sense?
1000%, more than ever. They are so grateful for us being there. They want our hugs, like I said, and just our participation, and to know that they're not standing alone. 1000% they want us there. We're not in the way.
Now, I would add that in fact, it was surprising how much they appreciated our being there. Whether it be the people in the hotels, whether it be the people who have been evacuated to be living in the hotels, the people who left their kibbutzim, to the shopkeepers who just were everywhere we went. It was a toda to each of us.
And, you know, so many times, I'm just going to build on that. So many times, you know, we engage in sort of perfunctory exchanges with each other. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. You know, thank you for coming. Building on what Gary and Alan just said, like everywhere we went, it was the most heartfelt, sincere, emotional, tearful expressions of appreciation. So if anybody is thinking about going, go. Don't wait. Look, safe. Is it safe? We answered that earlier. Nothing in life is 100% safe. I think the most dangerous part of the trip was the drive to JFK. Um, and it's so worthwhile. So I want to go to the next. I'm gonna combine.
I apologize. I just want to
Sure.
hop on that because I also think for the people of Israel, just like us, you know, I think the news, they're seeing kind of this world reaction, and to have people kind of show up and to be there and to kind of know they're not alone, I think speaks volumes. You know, I think we all want to know that we're not alone. And I think they kind of gave us the message that you in America are not alone. We stand for you. And kind of person to person, we were able to tell them that they're also not alone.
Yeah, beautiful. And we are, by the way, I mean, I think many of us are feeling more alone today. And so it was not just chizuk for them. It was, I think for at least some of us, it was chizuk for us. I want to combine two questions now. David Weinberg, who asked, the young people on the news seem to have given up on the idea of peace. Is that what you encountered? By the way, not just young people, let's just generalize it. And then Pat Kazakov asked, given your experience in Israel and given your experience with the North American media, including Canadian, Pat, have you changed your political views in any way? I think those are sort of similar questions. Anybody want to take a stab at those questions?
So I guess I'll say, and I still feel, I think right now, as was mentioned, I think Israel is in the midst of trauma. And I think right now in trauma, you're thinking about survival. So I don't think there's a ton of thought about the day after. I think the hope, and I think we heard it a bunch, is we want to live in peace. We want to live with, you know, peaceful neighbors. So I think, you know, that hope for kind of a future without kind of war and without hate and is still there, even among the young people. But I think right now the focus is on, I want my 18-year-old to come back alive. I want my 18-year-old to come back unwounded. And there's really focus currently on survival and kind of coming out of it stronger than before. In terms of kind of the piece of kind of, you know, what, actually, I'm going to blank on that last part because I can't remember the second part of the question. So I'm going to.
The second part was given, how has this changed your own political views in any way?
And I think on that, I think it, you know, for me personally, I don't think it really has. I think what it has shown me is I thought it was complicated before, and now I know it's really complicated. And that there's so much more to learn. And I think I realized, and I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts since, that there's so much information that I don't have that I think is essential to get, whether it's about UNRWA or kind of, you know, kind of the whole kind of history of that's gone into, you know, and where we're at in terms of settler colonialism, and kind of being able to be a little bit more savvy and kind of what the language is that's being used currently. You know, there's lots of things that have kind of sped by me, and I'm catching up.
Good job.
I think the young people, actually, there was a young person at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs we met with, and he said he was a typical young, very liberal person. In fact, he said, I'm a flaming gay liberal. I was a peacenik. I could have been one of the people that went to that party that day, but I didn't. Some of my friends were killed. I wanted to make peace with everybody before, but now I realize there's no one to really make peace with. And the day after is years from now. I mean, we have to remember 1973 war with Egypt ended in 1973. It wasn't until 6 years later that there was an enduring peace with Egypt. So it's not a day after, it's not a month after, it's not a year after. It could take longer than that. And when we think about Nazi Germany and Japan, we annihilated them first, and then the day after came, fortunately, it came by us building up their culture and their democracy, and now they're our best allies. That would be a wonderful thing to hope for, but it doesn't start the day after. It could take a generation. Have to have some strong leadership of the peace-loving Arab countries and peace-loving Western countries that want to make this happen, and find the right leaders of the Palestinians that want to make skyscrapers like Dubai in Gaza instead of tunnels of death underneath.
Well said.
We haven't found that yet.
One of the things that I found was the trauma of October 7th is such, and the continuing loss of life of the IDF members and their injuries has sort of taken away the sense of empathy for Palestinians. And to the extent that Israelis have lacked empathy, you can certainly see how the people who have been displaced in Gaza are also going to be lacking empathy. And so that we need to give it time, although it's certainly encouraging to see that the kibbutzniks, particularly in Kibbutz Sufa, are looking forward. And they want, you don't rebuild in a place where you think it's going to get destroyed again. And they're building new housing. So there is that hope, but it's a question of it takes two to make peace. It takes two to tango, and you need to find somebody else who's willing to step back and say, this is not a way to go forward in our lives.
Exactly. All right. There's a few more questions, and then I'll turn to, I just want to answer a couple real quickly and then turn to one by Claire, because I think it's a really important question that speaks to the relevance of going now on other trips. And Robin's question, she may be related to Jeff. So I'll start with Lisa Vaith. Actually, this is a comment, but Lisa, I'm going to read it because it's beautiful. And having leaders such as the ones on this webinar make it easy for me to remember in capital letters why I have dedicated over 3 decades of my life to working at Federation. You have made this community incredibly proud. For those who don't know, Lisa Vaith is an angel who's worked here for, as she said, 3 decades and over 3 decades, and manages 31 cemeteries, Chesed Shel Emet, helping those who can't say thank you. And it's just a beautiful thing. So thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. And then Robin Landau asked, is the Federation planning any future trips? And indeed, we are looking at, we haven't fully finalized the date or details, but we are looking at a trip, hopefully in November. And we'll be working to put together details in the coming weeks and then sharing that with the community. But it is important that we go. It's hopefully by November, Israel won't be in an active state of war, but the relevance of going is critical. And so we are beginning to work and think about that as well. And I want to then turn back to Claire Zeidenberg's question, which speaks to the importance of going now. And a lot of my friends and people in the community beyond this group of 11 have gone on their own for various programs. Claire asks, were you able to volunteer and participate in any programs? So I'd love to maybe just close with any thoughts about, or sharing about a little bit of the volunteerism and any thoughts about how that impacted you and why it was important.
Hey, David, can I just say one thing about the prior question too? Because I think it's important. What's talked about consistently on the street in Israel is the conception. And the idea that over the last number of years, they were supplying Gaza and Gazans with jobs, with food, with opportunity. And the thought was that if you could keep your neighbors really well cared for, then there would be less risk of something happen to you. And they feel like they've all been had by this idea of the conception. So for me as a whole, I think the country has taken a step to the right. Whether that holds remains to be seen. But when we say peace, it's not what it was before. No one's talking about a two-state solution or an opportunity for peace. What they're talking about is really strong militarized borders that allow them then to live in peace. So I think that's a shift that we saw that's different from prior trips that I took to Israel, even the trip that we took in May. And in terms of the volunteering, I mean, I think it was really meaningful. For me, the most meaningful was picking oranges. And the reason why it was most meaningful is obviously it was super fun and you feel productive. But the other side is just to see the need and to see farmers' land that they've dedicated years and years and years to maintaining, which is not easy work. Really sit there without the care that it needs, because all the foreign workers went home and all the workers from Gaza and from the West Bank have gone home. And so it felt really important, even though to some degree it was symbolic, because relative to the amount of work that needs to happen, we did this much. But it felt really important to bear witness to that and to be able to help in some small way.
Thank you, Jill.
No, I would add, when we were out picking oranges, a group of employees of Google had been given the day off, and they were joining us in the fields as well, doing what we were doing. And the fact that they took Google gave them the time off to do this, and that this is what their volunteer task was really just heartwarming. Because I still have the scratches from pulling the oranges off through the branches. So, and then we also engaged in other volunteer activities. We sorted clothing that had been donated so that they could figure out sizes and ages, because they have so much that needs to be organized. And we also went through and sorted through fruits and vegetables, identifying those that could be eaten and those that were just waste, so that those could be packed up and distributed to people who have needs for food. So there was several days of that kind of volunteerism that was important to us.
So if people have questions, there are programs on an ongoing basis. JNF is offering programs on a regular basis, 3-4 day volunteer trips. SAR-L is a program that many in our community have participated in, where you go work on an army base for a few weeks, packing supplies, and there are a variety of ways. So we're happy to try to connect people if there are interests. I'll just close, first of all, with enormous gratitude to the people in this panel, and to everyone who joined us on the trip, and the staff and others who made it possible for us to go, and also to thank this community, because we saw the impact that our community has had because of the incredible generosity of this community over the last 3 months, contributing $7 million plus, and has enabled us to make an impact in standing with our brothers and sisters at this most difficult time. We are showing up. We did show up as Greater Hartford. We will show up. And as difficult as this period is, I am confident that we will grow stronger.
And a plug to the Jewish Community Foundation, who helped to support the security needs that we had on the trip, and we couldn't have done it without them.
Correct. They're our partners in everything. All right. Have a wonderful evening, and early Shabbat Shalom. And thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.